Okay, thank you for the introduction. So this presentation is a presentation of one of the chapters in the book, and I'm going to talk about formatting testimony. So, as we already know, there are numerous disciplines which study testimony: literary theory, oral historians, historians of trials of Nazi perpetrators, psychoanalysts, cognitive psychologists, and maybe this list could be longer. And it seems to me that the phenomenon of testimony and passing testimony was already present during the war. I mean, people told stories. However, when it comes to audiovisual testimony, and this is something that I'm concerned with, Jeremy Hicks claims that the first audiovisual testimonies were recorded already during the war in the Soviet Union. However, they were rarely used in the films, or they were replaced with voiceover explaining why the Soviet Union is fighting with Nazi Germany. When Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated, the Red Army crew didn't have any audio recording devices, but they noted by hand what the survivors said. I think that these materials are lost. I couldn't trace them. When it comes to first proper audiovisual testimony, there is a difference of opinion. Some people, such as Michael Rothberg, claim that this is Jean Rouche's Chronicle of a Summer, 1961. James Jordan speaks of survivors in British television in the 1950s. And the same program was also on American television around the same time. So what my angle is? So to me, the phenomenon of formatting testimony is not limited to audiovisual testimony. I think that testimony has been formatted in a number of media, so you can find it in written testimony, oral testimony, audiovisual testimonies. I don't have time to give examples today. And to me, it seems that testimonies are being molded so that they fit a certain generic or rhetorical frame of the communicative situation in which they were created. And this is true for institutions. So institutions had different agendas, and we have scholars who wrote about that here. But also filmmakers had their own agendas, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't during the shooting, but they did have some agenda during editing. Also, the interviewers had their mark on testimony. Sometimes the filmmaker and the interviewer are not the same person or persons. And finally, survivors either played by the book or they tried to negotiate the rules. The first Polish example of a documentary film that is based almost entirely on testimony is Tadeusz Jaworski's film Byłem Kapo, I Was a Capo, 1963. The man whom you can see here is a former capo from Birkenau, a Polish man from Warsaw who was sent to the camp as a 17-year-old, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment after the war, and he was recorded in his cell, and his testimony, which is really emotional, is contrasted with testimonies of other witnesses who weren't sentenced to any jail time. And it's not only contrasted in how they deliver the testimony, but it is also contrasted visually. So the capo is always dead center, whereas the other witnesses are either on the left side or on the right side of the camera. What is interesting about this film is the fact that it's polyphonic. So different views on the camp are expressed. Okay, now we move to mid-1980s, and I'm going to talk about Marcel Łoziński and his film Świadkowie, Witnesses. This is a film about the Kielce pogrom, and we already heard about anti-Jewish violence after the war yesterday, and this is a justification why this film is in my book. And for the first time the pogrom was mentioned in the audiovisual medium was in the Polish film Chronicle in 1946, and this is something that Łoziński starts his film with. What's interesting about the Polish film Chronicle is the fact that the voiceover is full of condemnation. So the authorities are condemning the perpetrators. They also say that the nation was full of condemnation too, which wasn't true, but this is something that the authorities wanted to promote. And what we see here is Jewish women during the funeral. Allegedly, this is not, it wasn't filmed in Kielce. It's a staple image that was used in Soviet newsreels whenever they wanted to comment on the fate of the victims of the Nazis or other victims. So when Łoziński came to Kielce, Polish witnesses had vivid memories of the pogrom, but they didn't want to share these memories with him. So he went to the local bishop, who authorized the director to tell the witnesses that the film is a project of the diocese, and then people opened up. So what's specific about this film? First, the film is dialogical. There is no conspicuous intervention of the filmmaker. There is a clash of attitudes of witnesses. So some witnesses say that violence was admissible, some others claim that they were confronting the mob. There is also a special category of people who were taken for Jews during the pogrom, and they explained themselves that they are not Jewish, or some others who think that they, in the 1980s, who think that they look Jewish enough to be targeted back then in the pogrom. So now, what was the background in the 1980s? So if you wanted to make a documentary film in the 1980s, you had to have support from the state in order to obtain access to film. However, since Świadkowie were recorded on VHS, Łoziński didn't have to ask anybody. So that was a crucial change. So when we look at what happened, Claude Lanzmann's Shoah was shown on Polish television in a short clip of about 1 hour, which presented Polish witnesses as compassionless observers of the final moments of Jews on their way to the death camps. So that's one thing that Łoziński is responding to. The other thing that he is responding to is Jan Błoński's essay, Poor Poles Look at the Ghetto. But when we compare these two responses, Łoziński is less sympathetic to the Poles. So Błoński said, we were indifferent, but we weren't hostile, we weren't murderers. Okay, and the difference between Łoziński and Lanzmann is in the fact that Łoziński didn't try to influence his witnesses. So there are no tricks here. He also did not do the interviewing. There was somebody else who did the interviewing. So when we look at Świadkowie now, we can interpret it in the context of shifts in wider processes of commemoration, typical for documentary film since the 1960s, both in Europe and in Poland, as a response to European trends in documentary film, but also as a shift in the imaging technology VHS as a tool freeing the filmmaker from state control. Also, at roughly the same time, video testimonies became the medium. Video became the medium for video testimonies. And when we compare Świadkowie with Byłem Kapo, in Byłem Kapo, this dialogical character of the film was meant to accuse the perpetrator and correct his lies. However, in Łoziński, there is no accusation. I mean, if you want to accuse, you have to accuse yourself. I mean, the director is not going to help you in that. Okay, now we are moving to the beginning of the 21st century. Samuel Willenberg, who just passed away, who was the protagonist in a number of documentary films. This is Ostatni Świadek, The Last Witness from 2002. And this is a relatively rare film in Polish documentaries, documentary of return. Well, in Poland, it's difficult to find people returning to Poland. That's why this genre is rare. And the generic rules were established in Kitty Return to Auschwitz, 1979. What's interesting about Willenberg is the fact that the director places his testimony against the cultural tradition of Jewish heroism. So Willenberg is first shown in Masada, then he's shown in the Valley of the Communities at Yad Vashem. However, the director never explains the meaning of these places. So if you know them, you're going to relate them to Jewish heroism. If you know more, you're going to link them, for example, to interpretations of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising as another Masada, and so on and so forth. However, the director doesn't do anything in order to explain that to the audience. And this film is a biographic film, and the Holocaust is the defining event in the life of Willenberg. And the filmmaker is also interested in how memory works. So what we have in the film is either painful events etched in Willenberg's memory, and this is one of the examples. This is Willenberg standing in Treblinka, right next to the main monument, really emotional, recalling the moment when he found out about the fate of his sisters. He found their clothes there. And Willenberg is really emotional here. However, at times, Willenberg is hopeless as somebody who tries to remember things and has to rely on the help of Polish witnesses. This is one of the people who helped him on his way, on his escape from Treblinka to Warsaw, and he was hiding close to his house for one night, and the recognition is somehow problematic in the sense that Willenberg has problems recognizing the Polish guy, and the Polish guy has problems recognizing Willenberg. So this film was filmed on location. It was tracing back his escape route. So some people would assume that filming on location grants access to historical truth. However, in this case, it's not that simple. So he has problems recognizing people. He has problems identifying places. It can be attributed to the fact that he was wounded, he was escaping, and simply didn't know all the facts. And it contrasts with Kitty Hart. If you remember Return to Auschwitz, she's really, well, a master of her own memory. She would point to places, this happened here, whereas Willenberg is far from this certainty. And I would call Willenberg's performance in this film as intersubjective memory work. So you need other people in order to discover your own past. Okay, and now the third and final example, Pauline, Scraps of Memory, 2008. What we see here is a still that belongs to a sequence. So the idea for the film is Dylewska used pre-war or interwar home movies that were shot by American Jews returning to their Polish shtetls, and she asked their former neighbors, like the neighbors of the inhabitants of the shtetls, for memories about Jewish life before the war. And this is, I remember them, this is a voiceover of this gentleman. So what she did was to use testimony of Poles in order to comment on Jewish life before the war. So that is one type of commentary, and the other type of commentary is the use of e-score books, which were added to the footage from places which were shown on home movies. This part is about Jewish festivals, but there are also other aspects covered. So what's problematic about Dylewska, or about her film? Her Polish witnesses have really fond memories of the Jews, sometimes contrary to historical truth. So some critics called this film a pseudo-documentary, whereas others would say that this is a valuable contribution to the process of healing historical wounds by refraining from stereotypes. So what do I mean by formatting testimony here? So first, many interviewers erroneously assumed that the director is Jewish, which probably resulted in self-censorship. Also, these testimonies were incorporated into a nostalgic project. So Dylewska, as a Polish director, is kind of taking up the idea of Jewish nostalgia after the Holocaust to use it to instill certain attitudes towards the past among Poles. And also she's linking testimony to archival traces. And definitely this film shows how the witnesses and the film crew cooperate. And now to conclude, and I think that the major problem here is the question of authorship. I mean, if we are formatting testimony, who's the author of what we see on screen? So in Łaziński's film, so when Łaziński was producing or filming, memory of the war and the Holocaust defined biographical memory of the Polish population. However, later films use the trope of the last witness, and they form a cultural archive. So the era of testimony started in Polish documentary film in the 1960s, but initially survivors and witnesses rarely set the tone for film narrative. So it was typically the director or voiceover. In the 1980s, recording testimony became a study of memory work, influenced by Claude Lanzmann. When we compare testimony to video testimony, the main difference is that there is limited running time. We typically watch documentary films on the screen and not in a library. So I didn't have time to mention this, but I identified two traditions. So there is one tradition in which the witness is told how to behave, and Langbein was mentioned here who instruct people what to say, how to say. And the other tradition is the psychoanalytical tradition that I identify Dori Laub as the main representative. Testimony is to show who you are. And I think that in documentary films, there is always a conflict between these two attitudes. Thank you.